Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. I'm not even going to mention that we're home. You can tell right away. Our guest tonight is Dana Colson, who's a candidate for Vermont Lieutenant Governor. And also joining us is Ben Kinsley, who's our co-host, co-producer, and sponsor of the show. Ben, would you like to give a little 2-minute blurb on what you're up to?
Oh, I get 2 minutes now?
Okay. It's been a lot.
Fine, I'll do it in 30 seconds. How about that? Yes, my name is Ben Kinsley. I have a consulting firm called Imperium Advisors, and we do, really, it started out as a public policy development and research organization, and very quickly realized it's not enough just to have a good idea. You also have to be able to promote and sell that idea. And from that realization came a whole bunch of different products and services that we offer, everything from government relations to social media development, communications strategy, a whole bunch of different things, working with mostly nonprofits all over the state. So if you have a nonprofit and you're trying to figure out how to reach the right audience with the right message, give us a shout. ImperiumVT.com.
Good job. Thank you very much. You're getting that down. We'll have to document it for posterity. Anyway, Dana, welcome to the show. Yeah, I want to know if you can give our viewers a summary of a little bit of your background, and then we'll ask you why you're doing this. But let's do the summary first.
Sure. My name's Dana Colson. I'm from Sharon, Vermont. I was born in Hanover, New Hampshire, but raised in Vermont, lived in Vermont all my life to date, and hope to live here many, many more years. I grew up on a dairy farm where we did everything from milking cows to raising vegetables to logging. In winter months, we did our own firewood. Went on to college, graduated with a mechanical engineering degree from Vermont Tech, and later with a business degree from Franklin Pierce.
Nice.
So I have a lot of business background, worked in a lot of different businesses, primarily the welding supply industry, manufacturers. And 5 years ago, I started my own welding supply distribution business. Over the years, I've been the inventor on a number of patents. I have traveled all over the world, a lot of time in Europe, Mexico, Brazil, over the US, Canada. So it was interesting seeing different cultures and working. I've worked everywhere from shoveling manure to wardrobe and patent attorneys, and done everything from sales and marketing to engineering to tech support to purchasing. Got a broad background.
That's great. Good for you.
Very cool.
We should pick your brain sometime about tech ed, because this show and Campaign for Vermont really are pushing the benefits of tech ed. I mean, we could spend the whole show just talking about that, but I wish people would take a look at tech ed and realize all of its benefits.
Yeah, I actually deliver welding supplies to 2 of the tech ed schools at the high school level as well as college level.
Yep.
So I'm still involved in tech ed to some extent.
Good for you. We like to hear that. So Ben, go ahead.
So, there's a lot to talk about, obviously. I have a pretty diverse background. There's a number of things that you proposed, including, the criminal justice system reform, things like that. There's a story behind that. I don't know if you want to tell it or not,
Sure.
But maybe let's start by talking about that.
Yeah. So January 11th, 2018, my son Austin, my only child, went missing. He had planned on collecting scrap metal with another gentleman I had not known prior to this. Um, he had his own painting business in the summer. Austin did. But in the winter months, there was not a lot of painting. So he was looking to earn some extra money and asked to borrow my landscape trailer to go collecting scrap metal. This other gentleman had the truck that was going to pull the trailer, and the two of them were going to work together. Austin had lived in South Royalton, this town over from where I live, with his girlfriend Katie, and he just up and disappeared. It's not like him. So, to make long story short, we conducted a search effort in coordination with the detectives of the Vermont State Police Major Crime Unit. We had federal law enforcement involved as well. We conducted a private search as well in coordination with the detectives. I headed that up. Got a lot of volunteers together. We were literally going through acres and acres of woods in several towns, waist deep in snow, searching roadsides, talking to people, worked with the news media. They were very helpful getting information out in order to receive information back from the public that aid our search efforts. That eventually, May 23rd, he was found in a Norwich barn where the gentleman he was working with had been a caretaker for. He had been shot multiple times, ruled a homicide. And that gentleman has now been convicted in federal court of possession of a firearm because he was a convicted felon. He's got a long criminal history. He was a heroin user. He was also pled guilty to home improvement fraud charge. He's not officially been charged with murder yet. There's federal prosecutors are working on that case. So we hope that additional charges will be forthcoming. Currently, he's in federal custody for 37 months. And that gave me a lot of insight into the process of how the criminal justice system works. Subsequently, Vermont State Police started an initiative called Intelligence-Based Policing, where they started meeting in Tunbridge. I joined those meetings. It started sort of as a community watch program, but more. We were working on changing the entire criminal justice system from top to bottom. We held an event at Vermont Law School where I was the moderator for the event. Brought in local, county, state law enforcement, prosecutors, probation and parole, and some politicians. And we had a very good discussion. It was very informative. Talked about the entire process. And we've proposed a number of reforms. And that actually was where I first met John Clark. And one of the other candidates asked me what I was going to do. At the time, I was a little hesitant. Imagine I have a lot of work going on and also own my own business. So, but I thought about it and talked to some friends and family, and people had commented that they thought I'd be really good at it. Throughout the course of events regarding my son's case, I had a number of people that I thought were very respectful people from prosecutors and principals come up and tell me that they really respected what I was doing. And if that's how people that I think of as respectable people are respecting what I'm doing, then I thought, well, maybe I've got a shot at this.
That's great. That's really great. First of all, I can't imagine dealing with what you just dealt with your son. How old was he, Dana?
He was 19, just shy of his 20th birthday.
I don't know how you can deal with it, and my heart goes out to you for sure. But did you attend the VT Digger program that they had on criminal justice system at the Dudley Davis building at UVM?
Yes.
Yeah. I was appalled.
I was too.
Comments on the stage, and I wrote some stuff up that we're sort of waiting for the right time to put it out. It was appalling.
Yeah, it was very, very liberal tilted.
Right.
The audience could not ask questions. I thought the whole format was a little bit pushing of a left agenda.
Right.
What really floored me the most that stood out was from the ACLU when they were talking about releasing everybody from prisons and closing down prisons.
Right.
She was asked, well, what about murderers? Her comment was, well, they won't do it again.
Exactly. I was blown away. Like the gentleman, that's a bad word for him. The guy who shot their son. Of course, it's in his blood. It's in his nature. If somebody else does something, he's going to do the same thing. I don't understand that.
Yeah, this guy had a long criminal history.
Right.
Which the reason he had a felony was he beat and nearly killed his pregnant girlfriend.
Huh.
That he was convicted of. We've heard stories of him putting a guy in a coma in high school, got away with it.
He's just one angry, violent guy.
Yeah, he gets away with things and then he escalates.
And that's actually one of the interesting things to that comment from the and I wasn't at the forum. I don't have the whole context, but that's patently incorrect about the they're not going to re-offend because violent perpetrators of violent crimes are the most likely to re-offend. And those are really what, and when people talk about criminal justice reform and trying to get folks out of prisons, most of the time it's in the context of nonviolent criminals, right? And there are certainly ways to get nonviolent criminals out of prison. But I think violent criminals are exactly what prisons are for in a lot of cases, right? Because the ability to rehabilitate violent criminals has not been proven.
Well, then, the woman who made that comment, there was Sarah George, who is the Assistant Attorney General in Burlington, who also said, and I sort of agree with this because it's a bad facility, but the women's prison should be closed, which there's just too many people saying it should be that I'm sure it's true, but that women should not ever be in jail, never. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know. There's some women who have done some pretty violent things. Just because they're a woman, that doesn't mean they're nonviolent.
Right.
My first question would be, what about the woman who went into the state offices in Barrie and shot up the place and killed somebody?
Right. Yeah,
are they advocating she should be out on the street?
That's right. Yeah. So what are you going to do with your recommendations about criminal justice reform, Dana? Are you going to have a legislator present them, or how are you going to get them out there?
Well, I had sent some emails to the justice committees in both the House and the Senate in the past, and they have done nothing.
Yeah, no.
So the Justice Committee seems to be more concerned with taking away our Second Amendment rights than dealing with crime and the opioid crisis.
Yeah, you'll need to get a legislator that's interested in fixing this and have him or her present it for you in a bill form, maybe next year. They're not going to do very little this year. Once they get over the COVID-19, I think they've got just a couple of bills that are really important, like the budget, that they'll get that out, and that's the end for this year.
Right.
So,
Well, hopefully I'll be in a better position to have some influence next year.
I agree you would, I guess. So you've announced your bid, and what I just, it's a part-time job, and every lieutenant governor that I've known has always put his or her, just his individual mark on the job. What do you hope to do with that job?
Well, I hope to be a very pro-business lieutenant governor. The economy, I think, is going to be the number one issue after the coronavirus pandemic is over. People were stressed financially before this. I mean, many Vermonters are fleeing the state. Businesses are fleeing. If you step back and look at the big picture, we have 600 and something thousand people here in the state, only 300,000 employed. I would estimate between state, local, and federal government, approximately 100,000 of those are working for government. That leaves 200,000 in the private sector supporting the other 400,000. They just can't shoulder that burden. We're at the breaking point before this crisis, and that's why people are fleeing and making plans. More people are planning their exit strategy. Everywhere I go, I hear this.
It's not that easy, though, to pick up and leave, but I've been covering, as Ben has been covering, some of the committee meetings, because you can do it on this type of system. And the amount of money that we are going to be in debt by the end of this year and going into next year is staggering. And where they think they're going to get this money, that's a huge challenge for us as citizens and taxpayers. It's going to be a killer.
Well, we have a approximately $6.1 billion budget. To put that in contrast, New Hampshire has a similar sized budget, but they employ half the people. They do have twice the population as well. So they have more people to spread that tax burden out among. But government is serving twice as many people with half the staff.
And I think we have the one, Ben, you probably know this better than I. We're either fourth, somewhere up there, that we have the oldest population in the country, right?
Second behind Maine. So it's interesting because I've heard that New Hampshire comparison before, and it's not exactly apples to apples, because 1.8 billion of that of the Vermont budget is education funding, which New Hampshire doesn't have. Is the education fund. And there's also some things that are just fixed costs. Also, like, for example, roads. Vermont has the same number of miles of roadway to maintain as New Hampshire does. And we still have to support that infrastructure, unless we start shutting down roads, which I don't think anyone wants to do. So, there's some of it that is just inherent higher cost to pay for infrastructure that we all use. And some of it is we account for it differently.
But their roads look really good in New Hampshire because we ride through there to get the.
They do a good job of maintaining them.
They do.
Well, interestingly enough, I drove to Manchester, New Hampshire today and back, and road crews are out working. And contractors were working on I-89 in Lebanon and down through by Warner. The crews are not working in Vermont.
No, it's a good time. Nobody's on the road. Good time to work. So, Dana, you put out an awful lot of policy issues on your website. But before we get to that, you wrote a commentary which was entitled Leading Vermont Through Crisis. And I'd love you to talk about what you wrote and what you're feeling about that.
Sure. I have a lot of experience with crisis, as we discussed before. So I led a search team. And that's a very personal crisis. And sometimes in a crisis, you have to take a step back, look at the big picture, and keep your cool and lead. Lead by example. Try to stay out of some of the detailed fights that, for instance, we call it going down a rabbit hole. So you have to keep your wits about you. You have to set goals and focus on those goals. They may be day to day, just getting up, putting your boots on, and going to work. Keep moving forward. In that case, our goal first was to find Austin, gather evidence, and bring those responsible to justice. In business, I have to put my boots on, go to work every day, and try to make a living. So leading the state should be, in many ways similar. You use those same philosophies, keep moving forward. I have a background. I'm also a first-degree black belt in Taekwondo.
Oh, excellent.
So we have a lot of training there where basically for a black belt testing, they push you to the breaking point. And they want you to find it within yourself to overcome that. And so that becomes ingrained in you. It's part of your nature. Growing up on a farm, we worked 7 days a week. We worked hard. We worked long hours, and that is something that's ingrained in me. That's what I still do. Mm. I am also the financial clerk for my local church.
Nice.
So I bring a lot to this job.
Good for you. That's great.
How do you think that? So I actually have two questions. It's kind of a two in one. So how do you think that that those crisis management principles that you've had to learn, apply to the current crisis that we're in? And second, the lieutenant governor position is mostly ceremonial. There's not a whole lot of statutory authority invested in the lieutenant governor. In a state like Vermont, of course, they preside over the Senate, and you kind of have, Howard Dean kind of started this thing where you use it as a bully pulpit, kind of, for lack of a better term, but use it to promote certain ideas. What do you see? How do you see managing through a crisis like the one that we're in currently, and will likely continue to be in for quite some time? And how do you use the office of lieutenant governor to do that?
Well, like you said, it's a bully pulpit. Gives you a much larger voice in debate. You have daily interaction in senators where they are voting on bills. Also the tie-breaking vote if there happens to be a tie. But really, you lead the discussion. In an emergency, you need to have a plan. These plans should be thought out ahead of time with contingencies for any crisis. A few years back, we dealt with Hurricane Irene, flooding and the results of that. There are some issues with our infrastructure that could have made that less devastating. For instance, with our roads and bridges and cell tower communications. So planning ahead for those type of issues and events, it could be a weather-related event. It could be another pandemic. It could be a totally different strain of virus. It could be your chemical, biological.
Right.
There's all kinds of, it could be a criminal situation. So we have to have plans in place. We have to have the assets in place to be effective and quick in our response to these issues.
Yeah, I just so agree. When I wrote a few comments about when the governor said that all of the water supplies need to be sanitized or made sure that they're okay, and I thought that has got to be one of the very first things you do. If it's biological, just as you said, or chemical, I mean, that's got to be the very first thing you think about is make sure the water is safe. And I think I think you're right. We need a plan for all contingencies. And I think we'd be in a better place, because if there is a biological warfare of some kinds, we won't know what it is either. Just like the COVID-19, you have to respond and fix it before it gets out of hand.
Well, this has certainly revealed an issue, right? There's a global inability to contain this virus. Like no country on earth is able to contain it. And some are doing better than others.
Yep. But they should be able to, shouldn't they? I mean, what if we had a bioterrorist attack? Who cares what it is? I mean, if it's going to kill us, we need to know how to stop it. Or am I wrong?
Well, so this is interesting because looking back at recent history, right? The last, bioterrorist threat was anthrax, right? In the mid 2000s. And that is on the order of 10 times less communicable than this is. You have to almost have direct contact with the substance itself.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a scary disease because it's less curable, but it's also not as transmissible as this virus is. So
I think, a good leader will surround himself or herself with very smart people. And you need to bring together a team of people, hash out these ideas and plans and contingencies, have these plans in place. And it's not one person's going to have all the answers.
Right. Well, what I find interesting about this particular pandemic is how much states seem to be leading on the response. I mean, you look at Vermont, for example. It clearly had the plan in place, right? They activated the emergency response center almost immediately. Activated the National Guard to start sourcing materials that they needed. And Vermont has been a couple steps ahead, or it seems to be a couple steps ahead of most other states. Do you think that there's things we could have done better as a state? There's always things you can do better, but are there anything specific that you've seen that you think we could have done to get ahead of this a little more than we might be?
Yeah, there's always, hindsight's always 20/20. And any crisis, you have to analyze what went well, what went wrong, what could be done better, in order to tweak your plan to make it better for the next crisis. For example, my church actually had face masks in supply that they donated to the emergency center early on. So our church does a lot of planning and self-reliance.
Nice.
So we definitely could have had more supplies in stock. Our hospital capacity, we could have had more ventilators.
Right.
But you just have to keep moving forward. You have to look forward. And tweak the plan and get better each time there's a crisis, and try to look forward for the next crisis, what potentially could happen, and tweak those plans.
That's great. I want to put the data to respond to some of the policy issues which people will be asking you on the trail if you ever get out there. This is not an easy time to be campaigning, is it?
It's an interesting time.
Yeah, it is. So let's go through some of the policies that you have on your website, and then I'll ask you a couple of others that are pretty important here. But you talk first is to grow our economy. How do you plan to attack that?
Well, to grow the economy, we have to produce things. Increase our GDP, we need the private sector to do that. Government does not produce GDP.
Right.
They're an expense. They're the expense side of the equation. We need to increase the income side of the equation where we export things. And we have to look at every sector of the economy: agriculture, forestry, manufacturing, tourism. Those are just some examples. And we have to look at every sector and see what do we need to do to boost that sector. Lower taxes certainly helps every sector. Smaller government. Permits.
Oh,
I mean, Act 250 permits are an issue. Local zoning ordinances and the permits required at the local level. They delay projects. They cost money. Now, we need some common sense regulation,
Yep.
but we're over-regulated here in Vermont. We need to change that.
I think you mentioned Tropical Storm Irene. I thought after that we would see so many regulation changes because guys just went out and fixed things. They just threw the
Right.
regulations away, and the road's still there and it's still working. But it didn't happen. We got to the legislature and they went, nope.
Right? That's just a prime example of what can be done without so many regulations.
Exactly. Right.
I look at this pandemic, I mean, we're seeing how bureaucracy is causing problems with people getting unemployment, and businesses with the SBA loans. Money is not coming through. Government is not efficient, does not work well. In this crisis, I think what would have worked much better would be to hit the pause button on every loan, credit card payment in this country for 90 days. Banks, credit card companies can borrow the money from the Fed at 0% interest. And then that gives every individual and business that has a loan a break in their expenses with no interest penalties,
Right.
or credit consequences. Just pause. Just extend the term of everybody's loans for 90 days.
Right.
It would have been no administration costs really, and individuals would not have to deal with tied up phone lines trying to get through to the unemployment department.
Right. I feel bad for them. They're really stressed. It's just an old system, and I know that for sure.
It's built in the 1970s. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. I never wanted to spend money to fix it. I know that also.
Well, that may be changing now.
Yeah. Gotta have a brand new system.
So you also have as one of your issues the environment and the opioid crisis. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on those two issues.
Well, we all want a clean environment, and we just differ on how to go about that. Many on the left have seemed to indicate CO2 is bad. Well, CO2, if you go back to basic science and photosynthesis, you need CO2 for plants to recycle to turn into oxygen. So without CO2, we don't have oxygen. So many people who moved to Vermont may not know this, but 100 years ago, Vermont was primarily without trees. There was, let's say, 89% pasture and fields and 10 or 20% wooded. Now Vermont is just the opposite. We've got an abundance of wood. That is a resource that we can harvest. For instance, in my own home, I originally had an oil heating system. Oil got up to about $4 a gallon. I said, enough. I investigated pellet stoves. I installed a pellet stove. The first year it paid for itself and what I saved in fuel costs. You should be manufacturing more wood pellets than this. This would help the logging industry. heating more buildings with wood pellets or wood chips. Paper usage is down due to electronics. So loggers have taken a hit. More building materials are going with either vinyl or steel buildings. There's less lumber. So this creates another market for wood products. That boosts our economy. That's producing something here in the state that we can export and save heating our homes. So back to my house. So at $4 a gallon, I use 600 gallons of fuel. That was a lot of money. Right now, we're running about $2.50 a gallon, say. It's $1,500 to heat my house. I use 3 tons of pellets. Say that's $250 a ton. That's $750. Right now, it's half the cost to heat my house, pellets versus oil. That oil has to be imported. Wood pellets could be produced right here. That helps Vermont's economy.
That's great. Great. I think Ben mentioned opioids too. Did you have you had some comments about that, which is nobody's talked about it much, obviously, because of this pandemic, but it's still here.
Correct. And it's a huge issue. More people die of opioids than they have this pandemic. I know many personally have died. I know 2 people this year. Back to Austin girlfriend, Katie's sister was one of those. Casey. And I know another gentleman here who's 40 years old with 3 kids and a wife. So it hits all different age levels and many, many different families. It's an issue where we need to do 3 things. 1 is education, 2 is treatment, and 3 is enforcement.
Right.
Basically, we want to take the market away from the drug dealers. To do that, you need to prevent their future market through education. The Orange County Sheriff's Department is a big proponent of the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Against Drugs. It's very statistical based. It's interactive with the kids. It replaces DARE. It has more success than the DARE program did. 2 is treatment. The state currently uses the hub and spoke model, where they put a lot of people on Suboxone and other drugs with some success, but it's not a cure. They're still on a drug. They're just making the pharmaceutical companies rich.
Right.
And then, so we have proposed a secure rehab facility where somebody's charged with a drug crime, typically it's possession. Maybe they could go in here as a diversion program. Saves on the court costs. They get their counseling, treatment. Maybe they work in the facility, learn some job skills, build good work ethics before they're released. You gotta keep them locked up at least long enough for them to detox. And set them on the right path before you send them back out into society. And then the enforcement side, it seems like it's a catch and release policy. It doesn't work. Catch and release, works for fishing, but it doesn't work in the criminal justice system. At the state level, you don't even put ankle bracelets on pretrial people at all. Feds do. So that's, an interesting thing we learned from the probation and parole office at the law school meeting event we had. And a lot of, dealers, they get led down to a possession charge. So, depending on the amounts they're caught with, if they're caught with large amounts, clearly a dealer,
Right.
And the punishment should, be take that into account. So,
Good.
yeah.
I was in a meeting one time. I knew what I was getting into, but I proposed that we should abolish any plea deals. Oh my God. I heard from every law enforcement person in the Vermont area. Everybody called me and said, bad idea. But I thought, well, for Christ's sake, they give away the store. Have some sense.
Yeah. Our law enforcement, their hands are tied.
Yeah, for sure.
Monday morning quarterbacks, second guess everything they do. They're called racists.
Yeah.
They have a tough job.
They do.
And we need to support them better than we do.
Yeah, and Tony Fakos was on the show. I don't know if he stepped down yet from Montpelier chief of police, but he said they ask so much of police officers. They're more like social workers now because they have to deal with, the mental issues and drugs. Bad.
I believe they're actually going to embed social workers in each barracks.
Yeah, which is a very good idea to get it off of because the police aren't trained as they are. So.
Right.
Well, particularly for mental health crises in particular. But that's a good segue because the other group of folks that are also doing a lot of social work are teachers and education providers. Two of the other platform areas that you have is education and healthcare. We have about 12 minutes left, but what are your thoughts on those two areas?
Well, education, I of course support technical education. I'm a product of that, and we need to prepare, young adults for jobs, for a working career. And not everybody is going to be a doctor or a lawyer. We need tradespeople. We need people who can fix cars, build houses, fix our furnace. We need people in the healthcare field. There's a lot of jobs out there that are technical jobs, and we need people to fill those jobs. So training them for those jobs makes sense. I support preschool, school lunches. We need to really take a look at our education system from top to bottom. See what is working, what is not working. Obviously, it's very expensive here in Vermont. One thing I would like to see to tackle the cost side of things, for example, I went to my school meeting here in Sharon this year. Maybe roughly 20 people showed up. We voted on the budget, passed the budget. But you go to town meeting the following day, and we're voting by Australian ballot, and there's maybe 50 to 100 people there. I think we should require every school budget to be voted by Australian ballot. So more people have input on that. That might, force, people to sharpen their pencil a little bit when they're developing those budgets. Next, we've got superintendents who make over $150,000 a year on average. The governor doesn't make that much money. Why are superintendents paid more than the governor? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Can I ask you about Act 46 as we're talking about schools and mergers? And I don't know what happened in Sharon. Was that a big issue or?
Sharon's not, because Sharon was a K through 6 school. And then we have the private school, Sharon Academy.
Oh, of course, I'm sorry, right.
But we have school choice beyond 6th grade. But there's other neighboring towns where there's merger issues. I think in some cases, the Department of Education was trying to bite off more than they could chew with some of these mergers being too big.
Right.
And some, we need more local control over those decisions. And problem with some of those mergers, they didn't save any money.
Oh, no, not at all.
In some cases, unfortunately, some of the schools are overstaffed and they didn't cut staffing. And the costs keep going up. Now, I'm not proposing we lay off a bunch of teachers, but, through attrition, we could reduce some of those numbers.
Agreed.
Somebody retires, maybe we don't need to replace them.
Right. Good idea. Excellent. I don't think we have too much more time, do we, Ben? I'd love to, since you've got your NRA hat, I certainly should ask you about our Second Amendment issues here in Vermont.
Yes, I support the Second Amendment. I grew up hunting and fishing. Been a responsible gun owner my whole life, and that's kind of our Vermont heritage.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of people trying to take those rights away from us. I've been going to gun shows and hearings at the legislature. Unfortunately, I did not get there early enough to get a ticket to speak on that subject, but I believe I was noticed.
There you go.
There's several points here I'd like to make. One, there's Texas church shooting recently. If there had not been law-abiding citizens there with a gun to stop the perpetrator, there would have been a lot more casualties, a lot more dead. So having law-abiding citizens armed can be a good thing. Two, in the early morning hours, state police are not on duty.
Nope.
If somebody breaks into your home in the middle of the night, intends you or your family harm, they could be an hour away or more. A lot can happen in an hour.
Right.
So you need to be able to defend yourself. And if liberals had their way, you wouldn't be able to do that. We'll take my son's case, for example. The suspect in his case, being a convicted felon by federal law, was not supposed to possess a firearm. He got a firearm anyway.
Yep.
He's now pled guilty to that. So criminals will get guns, whether you have a law against it or not. And this case is a perfect example of that. My wish was my son had had a gun to defend himself at the time. The outcome may have been different.
Do you think that this person should have been able to get a gun? And I think the obvious answer is probably no, but what could we have done to prevent him from acquiring a firearm?
Well, an interesting legal question here is the definition of possession. So he was able to take his young daughter hunting, even though he's a convicted felon who cannot possess a firearm. As long as he is not caught physically holding that weapon, he can live in the house with a weapon. So his wife, for example, received a gun from her father, and that gun he used. So he could legally live in a house with a gun, but as long as you don't catch him with that in his hands. So that's an interesting dilemma. So it's a tough question there. How do you handle a situation such as that?
Of course, the big issue they talk about is background checks. When I went to get Mr. Paro's shop, they did a background check on me. It was only, I think, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes max. But
Right.
they wouldn't have caught my background if I had felony, I'm assuming.
Right.
Right.
And my understanding is that system has a lot of flaws.
That's it.
Certainly needs a lot of work. So the bottom line for me is law-abiding citizens, their right to possess a firearm should not be infringed.
Right.
Way, shape, or form.
Right.
Criminals, all right, we need to keep the guns out of the hands of criminals. You know, there are people who should not possess a firearm. But that should not take away the rights of the rest of us.
Right. So I guess the question then becomes how do you prevent people who should not have a gun from getting one, right? What's reasonable in that, scenario?
Right.
Well, I think Dana's right about the information on the background checks. There are, I don't know whether it's somewhere I've heard that there are people that maybe judges and stuff that really should be sure that information is put into the system, and maybe people would feel better if it's a very complete system. I don't know.
Well, and in this case, it's a little more tricky than that because, presumably the guy's wife would have passed a background check.
Yeah.
And, and then he would be allowed to have a gun in the household, even if, he's not supposed to possess it.
Yeah, I've never heard quite that argument, and it's interesting discussion to have for sure.
Well, here's a good nuance for that situation. Maybe he is not allowed to live in the house with a firearm.
Oh.
She can have a firearm.
Yeah, but he can't be there.
But he can't be near it.
Yeah. Whoa, that's an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
What
That is
the
interesting.
first or second safest state in the nation? I mean, we go to meetings where people have guns, and they feel great. It's like, bring it on. It's a good meeting. I don't have a problem with that because I feel most Vermonters are very responsible.
Correct.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do? So
Yeah, so we have a few minutes left. Let's see, Dana, you're part of the John Clark's Ag Republicans group, or as you're calling yourselves. Can you tell us really quick a little bit about what that movement is, what that group's all about?
Well, we are Republicans first and foremost, but many of us are new candidates. We've never held office before. Basically, I look at Vermont and the situation we're in financially, and if you want a different result, don't reelect people who are career politicians and people that created this mess. We need new ideas, new people, new candidates who will bring those ideas and plans and put them into action. So we need new direction. So that's what we're offering. And John, I've gotten to know him. I have a lot of respect for him, and we agree on policy and putting together a great team of candidates, all pulling for that same plan. And, our philosophy is we agree with 80% or more of the plan that's put forth, each candidate. And I think we're really going to focus on the economy, number one. Number two, the pension crisis. We've got to fix the economy so we can address that pension crisis. There's a lot of state workers and teachers whose pensions are on the line.
Mm-hmm.
And third is opioid crisis and criminal justice reform, which we discussed a lot of. Those are major issues. How many kids have to die before our judiciary committees tackle that issue? There's a lot more dying of that issue than there is coronavirus here.
Yeah. That's a big list you've got. Especially, we're glad you mentioned the pension because that's been a big issue for us. We just can't imagine that amount of liability before it starts impacting our ratings down in Wall Street and ability to borrow money. It's a big
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
our current legislature has no plan.
No.
What are they going to do? They're going to leave these people high and dry?
Yeah. I think they've put everything's pretty much on hold, though. In a way, I can't blame them. But on the other hand, this kind of issue has got to be solved. There's got to be a plan.
Correct.
But anyway, so how are you getting out and meeting us people?
Well, we're trying to do as much as we can electronically.
Yeah.
I've made updates to my own personal website, www.colson4ltgov.com. So I can accept online donations there now.
Good.
I've been tweaking my Facebook page as well, and trying to write a couple of articles here and there. Goes out.
Good.
Do this interview. I also have the advantage of my business. I have a big customer base, hundreds of businesses, thousands of people I see on a daily basis. So, sometimes the business and the politics intermingle.
Yeah, especially these days.
Customers will always ask me, how's the campaign going? And then we get into some policy discussion. So, and then I come from a big family. I got a lot of cousins in this state too.
Excellent. It's a Vermont thing. That's good for you.
Built-in base there. That's always handy.
Yeah.
It's good. Volunteers.
Right.
Great.
And growing up, I've gone to school with a lot of people too. So.
Good. Yeah, it's a big state when you actually have to go out campaigning. But it's a sad because businesses, everybody would be interested, and I hope they'll reach out to the candidates to understand what their policy issues are. I'd like a campaign where we actually talk about policy. That would be good.
Yes. Yeah. That was the first thing I put out was my policy list.
Yeah. And you've covered almost all of the big issues. So I think people will make sure they have your website and can go check it out.
Right.
That's cool.
I have not raised a lot of money to date. There are other candidates who raised a bunch of money without even putting the plan forward.
Yeah.
But I like the example of Fred Tuttle. He was able to win the primary with almost no money.
Yeah. There's no limit on family contribution. So there you go. I don't think they changed that.
And I actually knew Fred Tuttle.
Did you really?
Yeah, actually, my grandfather and him were friends. He lived just up the road from my grandfather.
I hope the people listening even know who Fred Tuttle is. But I must say, as much as I may or may not support Senator Leahy, he was so gracious to Fred Tuttle during that campaign. I give him a lot of kudos for that.
Yeah.
We could have gone, you're going to make a joke, but he was wonderful. And Fred handled himself pretty well, too. A real Vermont. Yeah.
Yep. I can remember going up to Fred's farm with my grandfather.
Nice.
And buying hay from Fred. And Fred would sit on a bale of hay and chew tobacco. And
a man with a plan, right? Is that him?
Well, we loaded the hay.
There you go.
Yep,
we are.
We're at time, unfortunately, but we really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yes, we do. Thank you very much for sharing, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.